The following spring, at Toulouse-Blagnac International Airport, early sunlight filtered through a veil of thin clouds, casting a golden glow over rows of training aircraft neatly lined up on the runway. A final flight test was about to begin for graduating pilot trainees, and among them was a name that many were watching closely: Leo Albrecht. No longer the skinny, anxious teenager once humiliated by suspicion and prejudice, Leo had now become a true aviator, earning every hour of flight time, both simulated and real, through determination and discipline. On his crisp white uniform was the emblem of the Toulouse Aviation Academy, and on his chest, a silver badge marking him as a graduating cadet. Today's check ride was a one-way flight from Toulouse to Nice, observed directly by two senior examiners from the European Aviation Authority. In the control tower, instructors and technical staff watched intently. In the waiting room, Leo's father, Richard Albrecht, still a high-ranking official within the EU Aviation Authority, sat in quiet anticipation, pride shimmering in his eyes. Inside the cockpit, Leo completed his final checks on the control panels. Next to him sat his co-pilot and close friend, Eva Meyer, a sharp-minded Dutch trainee known for her precision and calm demeanor. They exchanged a nod. "Ready for engine start," Eva said. Leo smiled. "Let's fly." The engines roared to life as the ATR-72 training aircraft rolled toward the runway, preparing for takeoff, not just to Nice, but toward the opening chapter of Leo's new life. In the sky, the aircraft flew steadily. Leo's hand flew confidently across the controls. His voice was calm and professional as he communicated with air traffic control. He not only executed the flight with technical excellence, but responded flawlessly to an unexpected emergency scenario created by the examiners: a simulated loss of engine pressure. His response was immediate, steady, and precise. Working in sync with Eva, he navigated the aircraft to safety, earning quiet nods of approval from the observing judges. As the plane touched down smoothly on the runway in Nice, Leo's voice came through the cabin speaker. "This is trainee pilot Leo Albrecht. We have landed safely. Thank you for flying with us." On the tarmac, the examiners said nothing at first. But as the cabin door opened, one stepped forward and shook Leo's hand firmly. "We've tested hundreds of cadets. You're among the rare few who don't just have the skill, but the strength of character. Congratulations, Captain Leo Albrecht." The cabin erupted in celebration. Eva threw her arms around him. A crew member captured the moment on camera, and that photo would later hang in the Toulouse Academy's Hall of Honor. A young pilot, holding his flight cap, standing on the stairway of his aircraft, the endless blue sky behind him. That evening, at the graduation ceremony, Leo stepped onto the stage to accept his diploma amid thunderous applause. When invited to speak, he looked around the hall, at his parents, his fellow cadets, his instructors, and the hundreds of new trainees watching intently. His voice was steady, deep, and clear. "When I was a child, I was thrown out of a pilot's lounge, simply because I didn't look like someone who belonged there. But today, I stand here not for revenge, but to remind us all, the sky has no fences. Every dream can take flight, if we are brave enough and given a fair chance." The entire hall rose to their feet in applause. Years later, the name Captain Leo Albrecht would become a familiar presence, on flights across Europe, in keynote speeches, and especially at youth career programs, where he stood beside others who had once been like him, repeating a message that never changed. "Wings alone don't keep us in the air. Justice does." That evening, at the Marceau estate, a renovated chateau nestled on the outskirts of Marseille, Clara quietly walked down the hallway bathed in soft amber light. Oil portraits of her ancestors lined the walls, their eyes seeming to follow her every step. The atmosphere was as silent as a monastery, but behind each door lay a world of power, secrecy, and sentences never spoken aloud. Clara entered her father's study. The room was spacious, with 3 walls lined in bookshelves, a walnut desk inlaid with black stone, and by the window, the armchair where Etienne Marceau often sat, swirling his cognac in thought. He didn't look up when she entered, only gently rotated the glass in his hand. "You have something to say?" Clara didn't respond immediately. She approached and placed a crushed lunchbox on the desk. The plastic cracked, pieces of sandwich still stuck inside. Etienne glanced at it. He set down his glass and stood. Not angrily, not hurriedly, just changed. The air froze. Who was it? Julian Roth, Clara answered, her voice calm, as if stating the name of a dish on a menu. Etienne walked to the bookshelf and pressed a volume bound in midnight blue leather. A section of the bookcase slid aside, revealing a heavy steel door that led to the basement. He said nothing more. He only glanced at Clara, not as a father, but as a judge delivering a sentence. "I'll take care of it." Clara didn't flinch. She didn't object. But for the first time, she spoke. "I don't need him to disappear. I need him to understand." Etienne tilted his head slightly, one eyebrow raised, as if he just heard something genuinely interesting. "Understand what?" "That he's just a grain of sand." Silence. Then Etienne nodded. No further questions. 3 hours later, a small van marked Service Blanche pulled up behind St. Valéry School. 3 men in cleaning uniforms stepped out, carrying boxes filled not with chemicals, but with surveillance equipment, audio recorders, and a folder labeled Julian Roth. They were ghosts within the Marceau system, men who erased traces, recorded conversations, and peeled back masks from anyone Etienne selected. Julian didn't know that from the moment he stepped on Clara's lunch, he'd been added to the watch list. The file collected over the next 3 days made Etienne smirk. Julian Roth, age 15. Father, Charles Roth, European Parliament member. Mother, Alicia Roth, once investigated for laundering money through charity fronts, cleared thanks to political leverage. Previously expelled or rejected from 3 schools for aggressive behavior. All records scrubbed. Etienne closed the folder and placed it on his desk. "A family that loves to clean up messes," he muttered. "Perfect. I prefer to make the stains visible." The very next morning, a sheet of paper appeared on the main school bulletin board. No name, no logo, just plain text. List of disciplinary incidents suppressed through external influence, based on insider sources and verified audio recordings. Entry number 4, Jr. assaulted a fellow student, April 2023, Lycée Montplaisir. Entry number 7, Jr. extorted younger students at Gymnase Roussillon. No full name was written, but everyone understood. That same day, an anonymous video was sent to the principal's inbox. It showed Julian forcing a younger student to take off his shoes to show respect. The scandal detonated like a bomb. An emergency meeting was called. Teachers whispered behind closed doors. And most importantly, Julian's followers fell silent. In the hallway outside Class 10C, Julian stood frozen as former friends turned away when he approached. For the first time, no one smiled with him. Clara remained the same, still at the back of the room, still quietly taking notes, still saying nothing. Only her gaze changed, enough to make Julian realize he was no longer the one holding the strings. He had no idea that somewhere beyond the curtain, an old wolf was watching. And Clara was no longer the silent lamb. Morning at St. Valéry School began with golden sunlight filtering through the windows, and the willow trees swaying gently in the breeze like any other day. But the atmosphere was different. A heavy, uneasy silence filled the hallways. Julian Roth entered Class 10C, designer backpack slung casually over one shoulder, but no one turned to look like they used to. Eyes averted. Conversations died the moment he approached. He sat down, feeling it. Not the sting of being exposed, but something far worse. The loss of fear, the one thing that had always kept others near. Clara Marceau sat at the back as usual. No one dared approach her, not because they feared her, but because no one understood her anymore. She remained silent, untouched by the storm outside. But in her eyes, something had shifted. 2 blocks from school, at a quiet cafe, 3 teens in St. Valéry uniforms huddled over an old laptop. On screen was a simple dashboard. Audio recordings, surveillance footage, and screenshots of text messages pulled from Julian's phone, gathered by a device of unknown origin. "You're sure she doesn't know we're helping?" one of them whispered. eyes darting toward the door. Positive, said another, typing in a line of encryption. Clara doesn't need to know. She gives the order. We execute it. What about old man Marceau? He knows everything. He's just waiting for the right moment. A long pause. Then all three went silent, watching the next video, Julian entering the library, shoving a boy aside for reaching the same book. That afternoon, an anonymous account on the school's internal social network uploaded a short podcast. Just 2 minutes, but enough to shake the entire campus. Did you know? Last year, at a private school in Nice, a student known only as JR forced a classmate to kneel in front of the entire room. Hidden camera audio confirms the event. That student now attends St. Valéry. No name was mentioned, but everyone knew. At the Roth residence that night, a storm erupted. Gregory Roth, Julian's father, clutched his phone, voice low and venomous. How the hell did this happen? How did a garbage podcast get out like that? His media advisor stammered on the other end. We removed it, but the source is untraceable. Hidden account, rerouted IPs across 5 countries, and I don't care. Erase everything. Buy who you need to buy. Shut this down before it spreads. Julian stood on the stairs, back against the wall, hearing every word. But he no longer felt untouchable. The stares at school, the anonymous threats, the accounts he couldn't erase. He was starting to realize someone else was pulling the strings now, and it wasn't him. The next morning, Clara entered the classroom and found a folded note on her desk. No one looked at her. No one asked who left it. She unfolded it. Slanted, careful handwriting. You win. Please stop. Clara stared at the words for a long time, then folded the note again, slipped it into her pencil case. She didn't smile, didn't react, just turned to her lesson, as if nothing had happened. But in her eyes, a flicker of frost. That evening, in the Marceau dining room, Etienne poured a glass of red wine and handed it to his daughter. It seems the game is nearly over. Clara lifted her glass, tapped it gently against his. I'm not ready for it to end. Etienne raised an eyebrow. What more is there? Clara set her glass down, gaze drifting toward the window, where the lights of the city shimmered beneath the night. I don't want him to fear me. I want him to remember. Night had fallen over the city of Valmont. The dim glow of streetlights stretched long shadows across the still surface of the lake near St. Valéry School. A solitary figure sat motionless on an old wooden bench, arms wrapped around his knees, eyes blank as they stared at the water. Julian Roth. No designer clothes. No swagger. The arrogant boy once feared by many was now pale, sunken-eyed, and sleepless. His hands trembled as he pulled out his phone. The screen lit up with a barrage of messages. Where did you get this secret? You better watch your back. Remember what happened at Nice? I haven't forgotten. Julian turned the phone off and tossed it beside him. He clasped his hands tightly, fear gnawing at his mind, not because anyone had touched him, but because he had no idea who was attacking him. And that was the most terrifying part. Deep beneath the Marceau estate, a dim LED screen cast cold light over Etienne Marceau and 2 men in dark suits seated on either side. On screen, a web of digital connections mapping out the school's internal network, spoofed IP logs, and a list of anonymous accounts spreading stories about Julian. Etienne lit a cigar. A thick stream of smoke rose as he exhaled, voice low and deliberate. Every action must leave a mark, and every mark must be carved deep enough to never fade. The man on the left asked quietly, "What will young Roth do next?" Etienne didn't look away from the screen. "He'll unravel," he said, "and then deny his own identity." At St. Valéry, a school event was being held, Unity Day, an art exhibit organized by students under the theme, "Kindness leaves no scars." All students were required to attend. Even Julian. That morning he arrived thinner, guarded, cautious. No one mocked him. No one welcomed him either. But the silence, that was the cruelest punishment of all. In one corner of the exhibition stood a drawing and signed that drew the largest crowd. A pencil sketch, hauntingly simple. A boy stood in the middle of a schoolyard, head bowed. Above him loomed tall, dark silhouettes, laughing cruelly. But beneath him stretched a massive shadow. The outline of a lion, fangs bared, eyes blazing. Below the image, a single caption. Silence doesn't mean weakness. It means the strong are waiting for the right moment. Julian recognized the strokes. The shading. He had seen that hand in art class before. Clara Marceau. He turned sharply and pushed toward the emergency exit, breath heavy, almost choking. That evening, in his room, Julian stared at his reflection in the mirror. His eyes were bloodshot. His lips pressed tight. One hand clutched his chest, trying to steady a racing heart. Suddenly, a soft rustle. An envelope slid under the door. No name. He picked it up with trembling fingers, opened it. Inside, a photo, old and grainy, of himself and nice. Julian stood in the schoolyard, gripping another boy's hair as the boy knelt before him. His own face twisted in glee. Below the photo, in jagged red ink. "We remember. And so should you." Julian collapsed into the chair. Sweat dripped from his forehead. He understood now. This wasn't schoolyard vengeance. It was a targeted dismantling of his legacy, calculated, precise, and inescapable. In the library, just before closing, Clara Marceau sat by the window. Evening light bathed her in gold, her dark hair cascading like ink down her shoulder. She opened her notebook. A question was written in soft script. "What comes next, Clara?" She picked up her pen and wrote beneath it. "Next?" He learns to bow. She closed the notebook. Her gaze remained calm. But deep within, a storm was still gathering. Early morning at St. Valéry. The November air was bitterly cold. Mist curled along the stone steps like a thin curtain veiling a truth that was slowly being laid bare. Clara Marceau walked slowly across the courtyard. A gray scarf draped loosely over her shoulder, shifting gently in the wind. She looked the same as always, silent, composed, unreadable. But that, more than anything, was what made people afraid. No one dared approach Clara anymore. Not because she had ever lashed out. Not because she had ever raised her voice or made a single threat. But because no one understood her. All the bullying had stopped. The drawing at the exhibition, the anonymous photographs sent to Julian, the erased social media accounts, the rumors, all of it had vanished. And then, Julian Roth disappeared. No one knew when exactly. One morning, his chair was empty. No announcement. No goodbye. He simply no longer existed in the rhythm of St. Valéry. What he left behind was silence. In the headmaster's office, Monsieur Delacroix, a man always proud of the prestige and order of his academy, flipped through student records. He paused at the name Julian Roth, his gaze darkening. The night before, he had received a call. A voice, deep, polite, but with a force that allowed no refusal, had spoken. "Your boy's file will be withdrawn tonight. And I trust St. Valéry has learned to distinguish strength from wisdom." The voice hadn't given a name. But Delacroix didn't need one. Etienne Marceau. In class, when Clara entered, all eyes followed her. No one whispered. No one sneered. No one tested her anymore. She sat quietly, opened her notebook, and began taking notes as if nothing had ever happened. But inside her, everything had changed. Julian Roth was gone from St. Valéry. Not because of coincidence. Not because of bad luck. Clara knew every step, every move, every whispered warning, every act staged like a play. And behind the curtains? No one other than her father, Etienne Marceau. That evening, on the balcony of the Marceau estate, Clara stood alone. The wind tugged at her hair. Golden city lights flickered below like distant embers. Behind her, the wooden door opened. Etienne stepped out holding a glass of red wine. He stood beside his daughter but didn't look at the view. He looked at her. "You did well," he said. Clara was silent for a while, then asked quietly, "What did you do to him?" Etienne took a sip before answering, voice calm and distant. "I didn't have to do anything. All I needed was for the people around him to remember who he truly was. And then they chose to walk away." Clara turned to face him. "Did his father call to apologize?" Etienne nodded. "Anyone who harms my daughter pays a price. And sometimes the highest price isn't death. It's being cast out. Until you no longer exist." Clara looked back at the city. A cold gust swept across the balcony. Sharp but not unpleasant. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Father, if one day I no longer need your hand to move the pieces, will you still be proud of me?" Etienne paused, then spoke slowly. "I won't be proud. I'll be afraid." Clara laughed softly. It was unclear whether it came from pain or pride. Below the balcony, wind howled through the trees again. But this time, the wind no longer swept Clara away. Because now, she was the wind. Since the day Julian Roth disappeared, life at St. Valéry seemed to return to its usual orbit. Classes went on as scheduled, teachers kept teaching, and the school bell still rang at every recess. But everyone knew. Something had changed. Everything had become too quiet. A silence that felt unnatural. Clara Marceau still sat at the back of the class, her usual seat in the darkest corner near the window. The pale winter sunlight filtered through the frosted glass, casting a long shadow across her desk. She wrote intently, her handwriting sharp and immaculate, like someone who had always been in control of everything around her. No one said it, but every student in the room knew that Clara was the reason Julian had disappeared. There was no proof. No one dared ask. And more importantly, no one wanted to know the truth. In the world of school, sometimes fear is more effective than any rule. One cold, rainy Friday afternoon, Clara stood before the mirror in the gym's locker room. She wiped away the droplets on her cheek. Not from tears, but from the rain she'd run through on her way across the courtyard. The mirror reflected a slight girl, dark hair dripping wet, eyes cold, without a hint of weakness. But in that reflection she saw a second shadow. Not someone behind her, but herself, only different. The eyes in the mirror weren't cold. They were empty. The face wasn't emotionless. It was exhausted. The shoulders weren't upright. They sagged, as if weighed down by something invisible. Clara blinked. The vision vanished. Only her remained. That night, in the Marceau estate study, Clara stood silently beside the bookshelf. She didn't read. She simply ran her fingers gently across the leather-bound spines. Books of philosophy and classic criminal law, the same ones her father read every night. Etienne Marceau entered. No sound, no warning. He looked at Clara for a moment, then asked softly, "What did the mirror tell you today?" Clara didn't turn. Her voice was calm and low. "I saw someone who looked like me, but wasn't me." Etienne set down his glass of wine, stepped closer, and placed a hand on her shoulder. When a child is forced into the adult world too early, the mirror will always show two selves. One is who they were, the other is who they are forced to become. Clara looked up at him. "And if those two selves conflict?" Etienne answered without hesitation. "The weaker one disappears." Clara was silent. Then she turned fully to face her father and said, "I don't want to be weak, but I also don't want to become like you." The room fell into complete stillness. Etienne didn't get angry, nor was he surprised. He only smiled, a quiet smile, like a breeze, but with something heavy behind it. "Then walk your own path, Clara. But never forget, if you want to walk untouched, you must learn to make people fear touching you." The next morning, Clara looked in the mirror once again. No more illusions, only her, calm, cold. But this time, her eyes weren't hollow anymore. They had depth, the depth of someone who understands. Power doesn't just come from those who create darkness. It also belongs to those who learn to live within it and still keep their light. After Julian Roth vanished from St. Valéry, the school administration quickly admitted a new student to fill the vacancy, a move that seemed routine on the surface, but to Clara Marceau, it felt like a new chess piece had just been placed on a board she had nearly mastered. His name was Matteo Laurent. He arrived on a cold Monday morning when the sky hung low and gray, blanketing the school grounds like a layer of ash. He had light brown curls, storm-gray eyes, and a smile that many described as borderless. Not exactly warm, not quite cold, just enough to make others wary without knowing why. He was assigned the seat in front of Clara. Throughout the entire first lesson, he didn't turn around once. He didn't ask questions, didn't try to make conversation, and that, in itself, caught Clara's attention. She was used to stolen glances, nervous whispers, the twitching curiosity of those both frightened and fascinated by her. But Matteo was different. He wasn't afraid, but he also wasn't curious. That silence, to Clara, was a challenge. During the break, Clara was walking down the hallway, an old Kafka novel in her hand, when a voice suddenly came from behind her. "Franz Kafka? Not a bad choice. But I think Dostoevsky suits you better." She turned. Matteo stood there, hands in pockets, his gaze unwavering. "You're into existential philosophy?" she asked, unable to fully hide her contempt. Matteo shrugged. "I like characters who know they can't escape themselves. People like you." Clara froze for a split second. For the first time in a long while, someone spoke to her as if they'd seen through the surface. "You think you understand me?" she said flatly. No, Matteo replied. But I understand people like you. Survivors. And survival usually comes with a price. Clara didn't answer. She turned and walked away. But for the first time in months, something inside her stirred, and it wasn't calm. In the days that followed, Matteo did nothing to stand out, and yet his presence unsettled Clara in a strange way. He didn't follow anyone. He didn't try to fit into any group. Nor did he avoid anyone. But he was always there. Always at the right place, at the right time, as if observing without ever leaving a trace. Clara began to dig. She investigated. His student file was spotless, too spotless. Impressive grades, no disciplinary records. But to Clara, perfection was often a mask. She flipped through each page until she reached a small, nearly overlooked note. Before transferring to St. Valéry, Matteo attended Lycée St. Helene, where, last year, a student disappeared under unexplained circumstances. Clara stopped. Her eyes narrowed slowly, and deep inside, instead of fear, she felt something else, intrigue. It seemed her board finally had a new player worthy of the game. Since the day Matteo Laurent arrived, Clara Marceau no longer walked the halls of St. Valéry as someone in absolute control. She still held her calm demeanor, her dagger-sharp eyes, and her words that cut with surgical precision. But inside, a game of chess had begun, one she hadn't planned. And the most dangerous part? She felt exhilarated. That afternoon in the school's old library, a place rarely visited, Clara settled into a shadowed corner, opened her laptop, and began digging. No longer content with student records, she dove into old news articles, unsolved disappearances, rumors of students who had simply vanished from the system. The name Lycée St. Helene triggered a string of vague news pieces, but one name kept appearing in the comments. Gabriel Fournier, an outstanding student who disappeared at the end of the second term. The school claimed he had transferred for personal reasons, but his parents refused to speak to the media. Then came a cryptic post on a student forum. Gabriel did something, and then he was erased like he never existed. No one talks about him now. But I know this. The last person to speak to Gabriel was Matteo Laurent. Clara narrowed her eyes. The next day, as the lunch bell rang, Clara didn't head toward the cafeteria. Instead, she crossed the back courtyard to a cluster of old stone benches almost no one ever used. As expected, Matteo was there. One hand holding a worn copy of Camus, the other flicking a silver lighter open and shut. "You came to investigate?" Matteo asked, eyes still on the page. Clara didn't flinch. She sat across from him, eyes steady. "Gabriel Fournier. He vanished from St. Helene. And you just happened to transfer to St. Valéry right after. What a charming coincidence." Matteo let out a low laugh, humorless, sharp. "What are you hoping I am? A murderer? Someone like you?" The last words hit Clara like a direct blow. "I haven't killed anyone," she said calmly. "No, but you make them destroy themselves." Matteo looked up, his ice-blue eyes cutting through her. "Which, in truth, is far crueler." Clara didn't reply, but it was a silence not of retreat. It was the stillness of someone studying her opponent not with emotion, but with strategy. After a moment, she asked, "So, what do you want?" Matteo smiled faintly. "A match. You broke Julian, made the whole school shiver. But me? I'm not afraid." "And if you lose?" she asked. "I'll leave, quietly." "And if I lose?" Matteo tilted his head, the corner of his mouth lifting in the faintest smirk. "Then I'll take everything from you. Your reputation, your power, the fear you've built around yourself. Piece by piece." Clara stared at him. Then her lips curled slightly, a cold, calculating smile. "I like your rules." They both stood. No handshake, no farewell. Only silence, the kind that sealed a pact written not in ink, but in eye contact. That night, Clara sat by her window, the city lights flickering beyond the glass. For the first time in years, she wasn't bored with the world. Because finally, someone had come who was worthy of the game. And the match had officially begun. Monday morning, the main hall of St. Valéry buzzed with students. As usual, Clara Marceau moved through the crowd. Not in haste, but with a presence so composed it parted the masses like the bow of a ship slicing through water. Everything retained the polished quiet of a prestigious school, except for one small detail. A single white sheet was pinned to the central notice board. No name, no school seal, just one line, bolded in all caps. At St. Valéry, the strongest isn't the one who spreads fear, but the one who fears nothing. Beneath it, an image of a shattered chess pawn. Clara stopped before the board. Whispers rippled like an underground current. Who would dare post that? Is it about her? That can't be a coincidence. She didn't react, but inside she knew. The first move had been made, and it was a declaration of war. Second period. History class. Matteo sat at the back, half his face lit by the weak morning sun slipping through the window. When Clara entered, her gaze brushed over him, casual, detached. But behind it was a recognition, like two grandmasters acknowledging a shift in the board. The lesson passed under a quiet, invisible tension. And when the bell rang, Clara didn't head for the door. She walked straight to Matteo, pulled out the chair beside him, and sat. That paper, your first move? She asked, voice just low enough for him to hear. Matteo smiled faintly. He didn't deny it. A bit too subtle for someone like you, isn't it? Clara folded her arms, eyes measuring him like a strategist appraising a new piece. I don't play behind masks. I know, Matteo replied, eyes fixed on her. You like daylight. You like them to see you coming. Because the powerful don't need shadows. And me, he tilted his head, lips curving. I prefer the silence that makes pieces fall before anyone notices. Clara rose from her seat. Careful, Laurent. Sometimes the one who moves first ends up checkmated. Matteo watched her walk away, eyes glinting like someone who had just placed his knight where it mattered. Later that day, a new anonymous message spread across the students' group chats. Did you know Clara Marceau once forced a student to transfer schools? But no one knows the real reason. Want to find out? Beneath it, a shadowy link, leading to a site with a single line. The truth about Clara. St. Helene revisited. Clara sat alone in an empty classroom at the end of the hallway. Eyes locked on her phone screen. No shock, no anger, only a slow, deliberate smirk. He dared to turn over a piece. Now it was time to return the move. That afternoon, as students at St. Valéry poured into the courtyard during recess, the school's digital announcement board, usually reserved for schedule reminders or extracurricular notices, suddenly displayed a new message. It stayed on screen for exactly 1 minute. If the past is a weapon, remember, every wound has two edges. CM. That was all. No more, no less. But the entire school froze. Everyone knew who CM stood for. And everyone understood this was Clara Marceau's first move in reply. Elsewhere, on the third floor of the library, Matteo Laurent sat by the window. One hand flipped through a book, but his eyes never left his laptop screen. When the line appeared, he smirked, not in mockery but in excitement. So, you won't stay passive either, he whispered, amused. That evening, a data file arrived in every teacher's St. Valéry email inbox. No sender. No message body. Just a subject line. Chronique d'un mensonge, a chronicle of a lie. Inside was a 4-page PDF, an anonymous testimony from a former student detailing an incident from 3 years ago at St. Helene, Clara's former school. The case involved a suspended male student, a female student who vanished from the records, and someone deemed uninvolved quietly transferred out. The name Clara M. appeared several times, but so did carefully phrased rebuttals suggesting the truth had never been fully uncovered. The report hinted that the version known to the public was curated by someone with influence on the school board. No teacher commented, but every single one read it. And each knew this leak bore Clara's fingerprints. It wasn't denial. It was reclamation, the power to define her own past. The next morning, as Clara entered the classroom, something had shifted. No more sideways glances. No more whispered suspicion. Just a silence, deliberate and measured. Outside the room, Matteo leaned against the railing, eyes following Clara's silhouette. His phone buzzed. A message from an encrypted, anonymous number. St. Helene records are being manipulated by Clara. Direct confrontation will only strengthen her. Matteo exhaled through a smile. He knew who had sent it. And he also knew exactly what Clara was planning. The Shadow War had entered Phase 2, no longer a game of gossip and fear, but a chess match of narrative control, of truth and the shadows behind it. That evening, inside the velvet-draped study of the Marceau estate, Clara sat by the window with a cup of tea in hand. Her father, Etienne Marceau, entered without knocking, as always. "You chose to make the old file public?" he asked calmly. Clara nodded. "If I stay silent, people will believe whatever they want." Etienne sat across from her, gaze stern but not angry. "You're not a child anymore." "I know," Clara replied, eyes unflinching. "And this time I won't let anyone else write the rest of my story." Etienne gave a faint, almost weary smile. "Then brace yourself. The one challenging you, he's no ordinary student." Clara nodded slowly. Inside her, one question repeated. "Matteo Laurent, just how far are you willing to go in this game?" Tuesday noon, the courtyard of St. Valéry bustled with the usual laughter and chatter. But in a hidden room behind the library, a long-abandoned computer lab, Matteo Laurent sat alone in front of a projection screen, the flickering light casting shadows across his calm face and slowly chilling gaze. On the screen, a blurry, static-filled surveillance video from the St. Helene campus played. Though unclear, it clearly showed a group of female students surrounding a small girl in the center of the schoolyard. Even with her head bowed, it was unmistakably Clara Marceau. A female voice rang out from the clip. "If you open your mouth again, don't expect your daddy to save you a second time." Matteo turned off the video. He didn't need to watch further, he'd seen this footage dozens of times over the past 2 months. And with each viewing, one thing became clearer: Clara wasn't merely a victim. She had once been weak. But after that fall, she learned how to wield power, how to control not just the bullies, but the entire game. And now she was doing the same at St. Valéry. Matteo exhaled slowly. In his hand was a dossier, a copy of an internal lawsuit between Clara's father and the St. Helene school board. A case settled internally, but which left enough traces for someone who knew where to look. He hit send. The email, titled "Truth Has No Owners," was delivered to a prearranged anonymous account, not to leak the information but to signal a shift. That afternoon, just as 11B was starting political social studies, the teacher received an unexpected message from the administration. Class was to be suspended and all students were to gather in the auditorium. There, an unannounced guest appeared, Mr. Didier Lemaire, former principal of St. Helene, who had vanished from academia following a scandal of unclear origin. He stepped up to the podium, his voice low and gravelly. "I came here today because too many truths have been twisted, too many lies worn the mask of justice." Students murmured. Clara sat frozen. Her hands clenched the sides of her chair. Didier didn't look at her, but every word he spoke sliced through the air like a blade. 3 years ago, at St. Helene, a situation was staged under the guise of protecting the vulnerable. But the one truly sacrificed was an innocent student. He paused, eyes scanning the crowd with sharp precision. "I remained silent. I was forced to. But now I speak because I see history repeating itself here, a student using the victim narrative to control an entire system." In the back row, Matteo sat with arms crossed. He said nothing. He didn't need to. Everyone was already staring at Clara. Not with hatred, but with doubt. After the assembly, Clara exited the hall quickly. She knew exactly who was behind this. Down the empty corridor, a voice called out from behind. "You might be skilled, Clara. But the crack in your story, all I had to do was shine the right light on it and everyone could see." Clara turned, her eyes locking with Matteo's. "You have no idea what you're up against," she said, her voice low. Matteo smirked. "I don't need to. I just need to make sure no one gets to manipulate the truth forever." They stood there, 2 players, 2 strategists. Neither stepping back. Neither lowering their pieces. That night, Clara returned home, her mind reeling. In her study, she sat before the glowing blue light of her computer screen, her face marked with tension. Her father, Etienne Marceau, entered silently. "You've let that boy get too close." "I didn't think he'd take it this far," Clara murmured. Etienne lifted a glass of red wine, eyes somber. "If you don't act now, you'll lose control. And you know our rule." Clara nodded. Either force the opponent to retreat or flip the entire board. Friday morning, the sky over St. Valéry was a dull gray, the kind that warned of an incoming storm, not only outside, but within the school walls. News of Didier Lemaire's speech had spread through the classrooms like an undercurrent, tearing at the carefully constructed image of Clara Marceau. Clara entered the main hallway with her usual composed gait, but behind her calm eyes, a quiet storm brewed. Students parted to make way for her, not out of fear, but because they were no longer sure which side they stood on. At the end of the corridor stood Matteo Laurent, waiting. As Clara approached, no one spoke. The air between them pulsed like two magnets with opposite charges, no introduction needed, no opening move. Everything had already been set in motion. Matteo spoke first, his voice calm but sharp as a blade. You think you can control everything with silence and a stare. But there's something you've forgotten, Clara. When power is built on fear, all it takes is one person who's no longer afraid and the whole empire crumbles. Clara smirked. Not a smile, just a glacial flicker in her gaze. Wrong, Matteo? An empire doesn't fall because someone stops fearing it. It falls when the one who leads it starts to doubt. And I don't. Then why call a full-year assembly to explain your past? Matteo asked, tilting his head. Is this the first time you fear the truth more than the lies? Clara narrowed her eyes. I didn't call them to explain. I called them to choose. That made Matteo pause. Not because he didn't expect it, but because he understood what it truly meant. Clara didn't wait for a reply. She turned and walked away, her final words trailing in the air. You stepped onto the board, Matteo. Don't blame me when the rules stop being merciful. That afternoon, the auditorium lights came on once again. This time, Clara Marceau stood alone at the podium. She no longer bore the cold defiance of a challenger, but the quiet resolve of someone holding her final card. I know you've heard the rumors. About me. About the past. About power. Her voice was steady, clear, without apology. I won't deny it. I've been hurt. I've fought back. And I don't apologize for that. A few glances exchanged in the crowd. Matteo was there too, sitting in the back row. This time, he didn't challenge. He listened. You feared me because you thought I was dangerous. But the truth is I feared all of you first. A ripple moved through the hall. I used to live like a shadow, waiting for someone to help, to protect me. No one came. So I learned to stand on my own. To fight my own battles. Maybe I didn't choose the way most people would. But I'm still standing. She paused. Her gaze fixed on Matteo. I don't need your forgiveness. I don't need your defense. I just need you to understand this. If one day someone else is pushed to the edge like I once was, do better than what you did with me. Silence blanketed the auditorium. The next day, Matteo submitted a brief letter to the administration. He declined the offer to lead a new student coalition aimed at challenging Clara. The reason? Just one line. I thought I was exposing a manipulator. Turns out I was only holding up a mirror. A week later, life at St. Valéry slowly returned to its usual rhythm. But beneath that normal, everyone knew the order had shifted. No longer were fearmongers in charge. No longer were the silent ones powerless. Clara Marceau still came to school every day like any other student. No one avoided her anymore, but no one bowed to her either. They looked at her not with fear, but with recognition. As for Matteo, he remained quiet. But now, whenever their paths crossed in the hallway, he and Clara nodded to each other. Not as enemies, but as two people who knew this truth intimately. Real strength isn't about who wins. It's about who's still standing after the storm.